What else are you hearing from the palace tonight about Princess Catherine's condition, not to mention the timing of this announcement?
Minutes ago, Buckingham Palace was thrown into a silence more chilling than the darkest winter night. Staff moved like shadows, doors slammed without explanation, and the air seemed heavy with dread. Whispers spread faster than truth. Catherine had delivered devastating news so heartbreaking it brought King Charles and Prince William to tears. What could shake the monarchy's very foundation in a single moment? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace that morning was unlike anything seen in years. The usual precision and calm of royal routine had vanished. Instead, a sense of unease gripped the air. Couriers rushed from room to room, papers in hand, their eyes avoiding even the briefest of glances. Footsteps echoed in corridors that normally carried the sound of quiet dignity, now filled with hurried movements and muffled voices. For those who served within those walls, it was clear something grave had just unfolded. Outside, black cars lined the gates in an unusual display of urgency. Engines rumbled in the cold morning air as tinted windows shielded the identities of their passengers. Passers-by caught sight of the motorcade and whispered, their minds running wild with speculation. The palace had always been a fortress of controlled appearances, yet on this day, no amount of protocol could mask the storm brewing inside. In hushed corners of the palace, rumors began to rise like smoke from a fire. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had called for a secret meeting. It wasn't a meeting of ministers or advisors, it was personal, deeply personal. The staff, trained to keep silent, exchanged uneasy looks. They knew better than to speak, but even silence could not conceal the tension radiating through the marble halls. Something had shifted, and it wasn't just another political crisis or ceremonial challenge. This time, it wasn't about policy, treaties, or titles. It wasn't about the delicate balance between tradition and modernity that the monarchy so often faced. This was about family, something far more intimate, far more painful, and far more destructive than any scandal of politics or public perception. And it was Catherine who stood at the heart of it all. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone. The palace had seen whispers of affairs, the shock of abdications, and even the tragedy of untimely death. Yet this was different. There was an unspoken dread, a heavy certainty, that whatever Catherine had revealed would not merely change the headlines, it would alter the course of the monarchy itself. Those within the palace knew instinctively, this was the kind of news that could bring kings to their knees. And as the world held its breath, Catherine herself emerged, her face pale, her voice trembling, ready to reveal a truth no one expected. When Catherine finally spoke, her words cut through the marble walls like a blade. It wasn't just bad news, it was catastrophic. The Princess of Wales revealed a secret she had carried for far too long, one that not only threatened her role but shattered the hopes Charles and William had clung to for the future. The very air around them shifted, heavy with disbelief, as the revelation unfolded like a storm that no one could stop. She had requested a private audience with King Charles and Prince William, a meeting stripped of all ceremonies, stripped of all the layers of royal etiquette that usually shielded them from vulnerability. This was not Catherine, who smiled flawlessly at balcony appearances, or who carried herself with unshakable grace at official banquets. This was Catherine, trembling, her voice breaking with emotion, her eyes brimming with tears she could no longer hide. Her hands clutched at one another, as though the weight of what she was about to confess might otherwise crush her entirely. Her words did not come easily. They stumbled out, each one sharp enough to wound. She began vaguely, speaking of burdens she had carried, of fears that grew silently while the world celebrated her as the perfect future queen. For months, perhaps longer, she had hidden the truth even from those closest to her, afraid of what it might mean not only for her family but for the monarchy itself. And now, with nowhere left to turn, she laid bare the sad news that would change everything. The bombshell was her health. Catherine revealed that her struggle had been long concealed, masked behind her public smile and her unwavering sense of duty. For too long she had ignored her own suffering, believing that strength meant silence, that her role required her to carry pain in secret. But the truth was undeniable now. Her body was faltering, and with it, her ability to fulfill the crushing demands of the crown. It was not weakness, she confessed, but reality. The very duties she had been groomed to carry as future queen might no longer be sustainable. The impact of her words fell like thunder. Charles's hands trembled as he pressed them together, his knuckles whitening as if he could hold back the tide of despair. William, frozen, could barely breathe. The silence that followed was unbearable, stretching into eternity. Not even the echo of footsteps could break it. And then, at last, William's breath trembled, the sound raw and human, as if he himself had been struck by a blade. His eyes locked on Catherine's, desperate for answers, desperate to undo what had just been spoken aloud. What Catherine revealed was not just about her health, it was about the monarchy's stability, the future of her children, and the hopes of a nation that saw her as a beacon. She had held this secret for too long, believing she was protecting them all. But in the end, the truth came crashing down with a force too great to contain. And as the tears ran freely down her cheeks, the monarchy stood at the edge of an abyss they had long feared but never imagined would come so soon. But what Catherine confessed was only the beginning, because the truth had deeper roots, reaching back into secrets the monarchy had tried desperately to bury. For a king trained his whole life to mask emotion, Charles's reaction stunned even his closest advisors. His face collapsed, his eyes flooded, and the weight of history pressed mercilessly upon him. Catherine's words had undone decades of duty, and for the first time since his coronation, the king wept openly, not for himself, but for the daughter-in-law who had become the monarchy's unshakable pillar. The stoic facade of the sovereign shattered in an instant, exposing the frailty of a man who carried far more than a crown upon his head. Those who stood nearby could scarcely believe what they were witnessing. Charles, the monarch who had withstood scandal, political storms, and public scrutiny for decades, now sobbed openly before his family and staff. His tears were not just of sorrow, but of guilt, a gnawing torment that refused to release him. In Catherine, he saw not only a future queen, but a woman who had sacrificed her own well-being in service to the family name. She had hidden her suffering to preserve the monarchy's image, and now the price of that silence had become unbearable. To Charles, her pain was a mirror of the past, an echo of wounds that never truly healed. As he wept, memories he had long buried surged forward with merciless clarity. Diana. Her struggles, her torment, her cries for help that were too often stifled by the demands of duty. He had witnessed one woman destroyed beneath the crushing weight of royal expectation, and now he stood on the edge of seeing it happen all over again. The cruel symmetry of history broke him, and his whispered words pierced the silence of the room. Not again. Not her. Those closest to him would later describe it as the sound of a man haunted not only by his past, but by his failure to protect those he loved most. In Catherine's suffering, Charles recognized the monarchy's darkest flaw, the unrelenting demand for perfection at the expense of humanity. He knew, perhaps more than anyone, how relentless the burden of the crown could be. And in that moment, the realization clawed at him. The monarchy might soon lose the very person who had become its brightest light, the woman whose compassion and strength had restored dignity to a fractured family. Without her, the crown's future no longer glowed with certainty, but trembled in the shadow of despair. Yet beneath his grief lay another fear, more immediate and personal. What would this mean for William? The son he had spent a lifetime preparing for the throne now faced the possibility of carrying that destiny without the woman who steadied him through every storm. Charles knew William's strength came not from ambition, but from love from Catherine, who anchored him as both man and monarch in waiting. And the thought of his son standing alone in that unforgiving role broke the king's heart even further. Here was a father who had once placed duty above all else, now undone by the truth that duty could destroy the very people he held most dear. Charles's tears flowed not for his kingdom, but for his family. For William, for Catherine, for the ghosts of the past that refused to let him go. And while Charles wept as a father figure, William broke as a husband because Catherine's confession wasn't just a blow to the monarchy, it was a wound to his soul. Prince William, the man destined for the throne, crumbled before the woman he loved. He didn't see her as the Princess of Wales. At that moment, he saw the mother of his children, the partner who held him steady through every storm. His tears were not the quiet tears of a prince. They were the desperate sobs of a man begging fate to change its course. The weight of the crown could no longer shield him. It crushed him. In Catherine's trembling confession, William saw his world unravel, and his heart broke with a force greater than any crown could bear. He reached for her hand, as though letting go would mean losing her forever. His grip was tight, desperate, refusing to surrender her to the silence that filled the room. The words spilled from his mouth in broken fragments, his voice cracking with anguish. "Tell me this isn't final," he pleaded, the rawness of his tone stripping him of every layer of royal formality. For once, William was not the heir to the throne, not the future King of England. He was a man terrified of losing the only woman who had given him strength, family, and purpose. In that fragile moment, images of their children rushed through his mind like lightning. He saw George's innocent face, unaware of the burden already waiting for him. He saw Charlotte's determination, her spirit so much like her mother's, and Louis's laughter echoing in halls that would never be the same if their mother's light dimmed. The thought of his children growing up without Catherine's guidance, her love, her steadying hand, was unbearable. And for William, it was not just a fear of the future. It was a fear that echoed his own childhood wounds, shadows of the emptiness Diana's absence had left in his soul. The pressure of his destiny weighed upon him like never before. He had been raised to carry the crown, to embody duty, to withstand storms that would break most men. Yet in that moment, he was powerless. The throne could not protect Catherine. Protocol could not heal her. Tradition could not rewrite the reality that was unfolding before his eyes. For the first time in his life, the heir to the throne was utterly helpless, and it tore him apart. Anger welled up inside him, fierce and consuming. He looked beyond Catherine to the institution that had shaped their lives and felt rage at its unrelenting demands. Why must duty always demand sacrifice? Why did the monarchy consume those who gave it everything? William's tears turned to fury as he questioned the very legacy he was born to uphold. For too long, he had seen the monarchy's iron grip claim his mother, and now, it threatened the woman who had saved him from being broken by the same destiny. Through the storm of grief and rage, he made a vow, not as a prince, but as a husband. His words were whispered but sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "I will protect you above the crown, no matter the cost." In that single promise, William revealed his heart's truth, that Catherine came before the monarchy, before history, before everything. It was the vow of a man ready to defy centuries of tradition if it meant saving the woman he loved. But Catherine's sad news was not only about herself, it carried implications for the children who symbolized the monarchy's future. If Catherine could no longer stand beside William as the monarchy's heart, what would become of George, Charlotte, and Louis? Suddenly, the carefully planned succession looked fragile, uncertain, even doomed. For a king already fearing the collapse of tradition, and a prince desperate to shield his family, Catherine's revelation cast a dark shadow over the very future of Britain's royal bloodline. What was once a clear path now looked like a fractured road leading into uncharted territory, where even the youngest royals might be forced to shoulder burdens beyond their years. For Charles, the fear was immediate and overwhelming. His gaze turned to George, the boy born with the destiny of carrying the crown, and dread consumed him. What if the heir was forced too soon into responsibilities that would rob him of childhood? The echoes of Charles's own past weighed heavily. He knew the cruel demands placed upon a young heir too early. And now, as he looked at his grandson, he feared history was circling back, threatening to trap George in the same merciless cycle. William's terror ran even deeper, not as a king in waiting, but as a father. The thought of his children being robbed of their innocence tore at him. He remembered his own grief as a child, the empty space left by Diana's absence, and how the glare of the public eye had magnified every wound. Now he imagined George, Charlotte, and Louis, caught in the same relentless grip, their lives defined not by love and laughter, but by duty and expectation. For William, this was a nightmare repeating itself, one he swore he would never allow. Catherine, however, carried the heaviest guilt of all. Though her health had forced the confession, her heart broke for the uncertainty now hanging over her children. She whispered her regret, fearful that her inability to continue at full strength would cast a shadow across their future. The crown, once a symbol of stability, now seemed like a curse that might rob her children of the one thing she had fought to preserve, a life shaped by love, not sacrifice. And then came the question no one dared voice aloud, but all silently feared. If succession plans faltered, where would Charlotte stand? Would the little girl so often compared to her grandmother Diana be forced into an unnatural role, elevated too quickly, carrying a weight no child should bear? Even whispered speculation of Charlotte being thrust forward unsettled the family, for it meant acknowledging a reality they were not ready to face. In the darkest corners of the palace, conversations began in cautious tones. The word regency crept into hushed discussions. Advisors wondered what would happen if William was called to reign while Catherine could no longer support him, and George was still too young to lead. Could the monarchy survive such instability? Could the public accept a fractured royal family, already shaken by decades of scandal, loss, and mistrust? Every shadow in those halls seemed to echo Diana's memory. Her absence haunted the moment, as though her spirit lingered to remind them of how fragile the family truly was. Catherine's plight became more than personal. It became a reminder of the monarchy's darkest wounds that had never fully healed. And just as Diana's struggles had reshaped the monarchy's relationship with the people, Catherine's tragedy threatened to do the same, leaving behind scars that could redefine the crown for generations to come. And as uncertainty clouded the children's future, palace walls began leaking whispers, rumors that Catherine's tragedy was exposing far more than the family had intended. Behind every sad revelation lies a darker truth, and Catherine's was no different. As staff scrambled and documents surfaced, it became clear that her condition had not been sudden. The palace had known. Letters, reports, and warnings had been quietly locked away. And now, as the secrets spilled into the open, the monarchy itself stood accused of covering up the truth until it was too late. What had first seemed like a tragic twist of fate began to look like something far more sinister. A chain of decisions designed to protect the image of the crown at the cost of Catherine's well-being. Evidence soon emerged that Catherine's struggle had begun months earlier. Her closest aides noticed moments of exhaustion, fleeting expressions of pain that she masked beneath the polished smiles expected of her. Doctors had quietly raised their concerns, recommending she step back from her punishing schedule. Yet those warnings fell on ears unwilling to listen. Each time, the choice was made to push forward, to keep her visible, to ensure the monarchy's picture of stability remained intact before the world. And so, while Catherine's public grace never faltered, her private strength was being slowly eroded. Inside the palace, debates raged in hushed meetings. Should they delay her workload, ease the burden, allow her rest? The answer, again and again, was no. Tradition demanded visibility. The people demanded appearances, and the advisors closest to Charles whispered of silence being the only safeguard. Any hint of weakness, they argued, could fuel public doubt. And so, the truth was buried beneath a facade carefully crafted for cameras and ceremony, while Catherine bore the weight of it alone. Even then, she fought with a quiet defiance. Refusing to show weakness in public, she carried out her duties with unwavering poise. She attended events, shook hands, delivered speeches, all while concealing the toll it was taking on her body and spirit. To those who watched, she seemed unbreakable, but within the palace walls, her determination became both her strength and her undoing. By denying herself the chance to rest, she protected the monarchy's image, but pushed her own health to the brink. The shocking realization came crashing down with merciless clarity. This was preventable. Had her warnings been heeded, Had her sacrifice been respected rather than exploited, the revelation might never have come in such a catastrophic form. Instead, the monarchy now stood under a shadow not just of grief, but of culpability. For what Catherine had confessed was no sudden misfortune. It was the result of choices made in gilded rooms by men who valued the crown's stability above the well-being of the woman who gave it life. The tragedy of Catherine's revelation now threatened to ignite something even more dangerous: public outrage. Because once the truth of the palace's silence emerged, the people would not forgive easily. The monarchy, already fragile, risked collapsing under the weight of its own secrecy. But as the walls of secrecy crumbled, the weight of grief transformed into something more powerful: an unbreakable bond between Charles, William, and Catherine that defied centuries of royal coldness. For the first time in living memory, the monarchy was not defined by duty, tradition, or power. It was defined by raw, unfiltered grief. Charles, William, and Catherine sat together not as royals, but as family. Tears blurred their titles, silence replaced protocol, and in that sacred moment, history was rewritten. The monarchy's survival no longer depended on crowns and thrones, but on the fragile beating heart of one woman. All the grandeur and formality of the institution melted away in the face of human sorrow, and what remained was a family clinging desperately to one another. Charles reached across the silence, his hands trembling as he pulled Catherine into an embrace. For a man whose life had been shaped by restraint, it was a rare and unguarded act of love. He called her daughter, his voice thick with emotion, as if those words alone could heal the wounds his own decisions had deepened. It was a title Catherine had earned through loyalty and sacrifice. But in this moment, it was not duty that bound them. It was the genuine affection of a man who feared losing her more than he feared losing his crown. Beside them, William crumbled. He had carried himself with strength for Catherine's sake, but now his walls broke. His tears fell freely, and in a voice barely audible, he whispered promises of eternal love, vows not spoken as a prince, but as a husband desperate to hold on to the woman who had given him his life's meaning. He swore to shield her, to fight for her, to place her above every duty, every expectation, every tradition. His words were not made for history's records. They were meant for Catherine's heart, a declaration of devotion that would outlast any throne. Through it all, Catherine's quiet strength remained. Though her body ached and her heart broke, she found the courage to comfort them both. She reminded Charles and William that she was not surrendering to despair, but standing with them, however limited her strength might now be. Her voice was steady even as her eyes glistened, and in her calmness, both king and heir found a fragile sense of peace. Catherine's presence, fragile yet resilient, became the thread holding them together when the monarchy itself seemed on the brink of unraveling. For those within the palace walls, it was an unprecedented moment. Staff who had served for decades, accustomed to protocol and distance, now witnessed a scene unlike any they had ever seen. The king embracing his daughter-in-law, the heir reduced to tears, the future of the monarchy stripped bare of grandeur. It was a raw humanity that shocked and humbled everyone who saw it. No rehearsed lines, no prepared gestures, no polished appearances. Only love, fear, and sorrow, bound together in an unbreakable knot. Yet beneath the unity lay a haunting truth. This togetherness was not born of triumph, but of tragedy. It was forged in fire, a bond created not by celebration, but by suffering. And as powerful as it was, the fear lingered what would become of the monarchy if Catherine's strength faded further. Could this fragile unity withstand the storms to come, or was it the last light before the darkness? The very questions that loomed over the family in private would soon be echoed across the world. Yet grief has a way of spilling beyond closed doors, and what happened in private soon became the subject of global speculation. When the news leaked beyond palace walls, the world erupted. Headlines screamed with disbelief, commentators speculated wildly, and millions across the globe wept with Catherine, William, and Charles. Crowds gathered at Buckingham Palace, Candles lit the night, and chants of "Stay strong, Catherine" echoed across the gates. But as the world poured its love, it also demanded answers. How long had the palace known, and what would become of the monarchy now? The sorrow of a family had spilled into the public sphere, and the grief became universal. From London to Sydney, from New York to New Delhi, the wave of mourning spread like wildfire. Vigils were held outside royal residences, photographs of Catherine adorned with flowers lined the streets, and strangers held each other as though they had lost a family member of their own. The Princess of Wales had long been seen as more than just a royal figure. She was a symbol of grace, strength, and compassion. And so, her suffering was not viewed with detachment, but with a shared sense of heartbreak that transcended borders. Social media became a stage of solidarity, with hashtags like #Pray for Catherine and #People's Queen trending within minutes. Millions of posts flooded timelines, some filled with messages of love, others with outrage at the monarchy's silence. Videos of people sobbing at the gates, candlelight vigils broadcast live across networks, and heartfelt letters written by children became the currency of a movement that was part mourning, part uprising. The story had escaped the palace's control, and now it belonged to the people. But the same voices that poured out love also turned sharply critical. Questions erupted about how long the palace had hidden Catherine's struggles. Commentators pointed to past public appearances where she appeared visibly strained, and now, with the truth revealed, accusations of secrecy and deliberate concealment rang out. Trust in the monarchy was once again shaken, and the very institution that Catherine had worked so tirelessly to uphold now faced condemnation for betraying her in her most vulnerable moment. Yet within this storm, Catherine herself became more beloved than ever. She was no longer just the Princess of Wales. She was the people's queen, a woman who had given everything and asked for nothing in return. Public support rallied fiercely around her, as if protecting her from the very weight of the crown. Mothers compared her sacrifices to their own. Young women saw her strength in silence and declared her a model of courage. Catherine's pain, though personal, had united millions in devotion. The pressure, however, was mounting on Charles. Politicians began to question whether the monarchy could survive. Another scandal of silence, and calls grew louder for him to address the crisis openly. He could not ignore the chants outside his palace gates, nor the murmurs of Parliament questioning the crown's transparency. The king, who had been reduced to tears in private, was now being pushed toward a reckoning in public. And all eyes turned to William. If Charles faltered, would William step forward, not just as heir, but as husband and protector? Speculation swirled that he might reshape the monarchy itself, carving out a path where family came before duty. The whispers of reform, of rebellion against tradition, grew louder with each passing day, and the world waited breathlessly to see what choice he would make. But as the world mourned alongside them, one final heartbreaking chapter was yet to unfold. The moment that sealed Catherine's fate and left Charles and William broken forever. In a dimly lit chamber of Windsor Castle, Charles and William faced the moment they had dreaded since Catherine's confession. With trembling hands, Catherine signed what would later be called the Sad Declaration, a document confirming her withdrawal from royal duties. It was not death that stole her crown, but sacrifice. And as the ink dried, father and son collapsed in tears, knowing the monarchy's brightest light had dimmed forever. The silence that followed was heavy, not of ceremony, but of heartbreak that would never be forgotten. Catherine's final decision was made with courage, though her heart ached at what it meant for the future. She had given her all to the crown, but her body could give no more. The choice to step away was not one of surrender, but of necessity, an act of love for her family, ensuring that what strength she had left would be reserved for them. It was her quiet rebellion against an institution that demanded everything, and yet her ultimate act of loyalty to those who mattered most. Charles's voice broke as he tried to speak, the weight of a father and a king colliding in one devastating moment. He looked at Catherine not as a sovereign looking at his future queen, but as a man acknowledging the sacrifice of a woman who had carried more than any human should. His words faltered, but the message was clear. He admired her, he loved her, and he mourned the cost of her devotion. For Charles, this was not only a personal loss, it was the unraveling of the stability he had long prayed the monarchy would finally achieve. William, however, was shattered beyond repair. He clutched her hand with desperation, whispering through tears, "I can't do this without you." His words were not the declarations of a prince, but the cries of a husband who saw his future slipping through his fingers. Catherine had been his anchor, his partner, his shield against the relentless tide of duty. Without her, the path ahead seemed unbearably lonely, a crown that felt heavier than ever. His grief was raw, unfiltered, and it revealed the depth of his dependence on the woman who had made him whole. The symbolic moment of Catherine stepping away from the royal documents will be remembered as one of the most poignant in the monarchy's history. The sound of her pen against paper was not just ink on parchment, it was the quiet breaking of a bond between duty and destiny. Her departure marked the end of an era where she had stood as the heart of the royal family, leaving a void that no title, no tradition, and no protocol could ever fill. And in that silence, Diana's shadow returned once more. Her absence haunted the farewell, as if the ghosts of the past reached forward to remind them that history was once again repeating itself. Just as Diana had been consumed by the weight of expectation, Catherine now stepped back, not defeated, but scarred by the same relentless demands. It was a cruel echo, a reminder that the monarchy's brightest lights were often the ones extinguished too soon. Father and son were united in tears, their grief merging into something larger than themselves. The king and heir sat together, stripped of their power, mourning not only the loss of Catherine's presence in royal life, but the fragility of the monarchy's future without her. It was a rare, unfiltered glimpse into the truth behind the crown, that beneath the gold and grandeur, there was only family, wounded and broken. And so, history closed one chapter with grief, but left the world waiting for what would come next. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.